Hi everyone, it's MaryAnn Camacho here with episode 11, covering chapter 9 of my new book, How Many Employees Does It Take to Change a Light Bulb? Today we're going to talk about coaching change, up, down, and sideways. This is the art of change acceleration. You're going to need it in order to transform your team. Whether you decide to follow the model team approach that's outlined in the book or not, leading change is a leader's job. One of my favorite discussions about change happened during an interview. I was being interviewed by a senior vice president, and I was in one of the final rounds to get the job. This SVP was a tough cookie, smart, sharp, respected, and with significant experience across the company. She had become an officer of a Fortune 5 company in her late 30s, early 40s. And this was a pretty big deal for me. And I was nervous. But her last question during the interview was the one that I can't forget. She asked me, "MaryAnn, tell me about change and how you approach it." Now, I don't recall the exact words that I used in the interview, but it was something along the lines of, well, we need to change or die. And I don't mean changing without thought or just incessant activity. I mean with purpose and strategy and deliberate execution. And I also shared with her a key point that I know about change to be true, and that is you must be able to recognize when not to change. Don't change if you're already on the path, but perhaps you get knocked down or you hit a large obstacle, or when you're changing for the sake of change's sake and not the good of the business. Or that, the purpose for the change is not helping your customers or your employees. And certainly don't change when it's not congruent with your morals, values, or your integrity. It may take some grit, but it's wise in those situations to stay the course and not waver in your intentions. But you're going to need a pragmatic and structured approach in order to make big transformation. And I highly recommend a guidebook that I've used for decades. It's by John Kotter, and it's simply called Leading Change. And John Kotter outlines the 8 steps that we need to take to make transformation, and these can be followed by anyone. Number 1, start with establishing a sense of urgency. Number 2 is get a guiding coalition around that change to help you. Develop a vision and a strategy for where you want to go. Communicate it broadly. Empower action. Empower broad-based action. Generate short-term wins. I'm not talking crafting any kind of phony baloney kind of stuff. I am talking about early wins that you can generate that align and really prove the point of where you're headed. Consolidate any gains that you make and produce more change. And then certainly in order to sustain it, you need to anchor the new approaches in the culture. From the point of knowing that you need to make a change, you have to light a fire in yourself and the people that you need with you on the journey. You have to visualize what you want to achieve and outline a strategy to get you there. And you need to communicate it Monday through Sunday and via numerous different channels in order to reach your constituents. And as I said, once you make that change and get your early wins and those kind of things going, well, you need to sustain the change once you've made it. Here's a case in point conducted by the Stanford Graduate Business School. Back in 1999, Agilent was formed as a standalone $8 billion startup from several successful units of the Hewlett-Packard firm. The new Agilent CEO wanted to take the best of HP's culture and practices known as the HP way and grow exponentially with external focus. Just 6 months into it, they were already ranking in the top 50 of Forbes' best companies to work for, nearly 20 points higher than their HP brethren. They had the largest initial public offering Silicon Valley had ever seen at $2.1 billion. Their employee base had mostly migrated from HP and was now 46,000 strong. They were focused and they were ready. At the start, their change management plan was robust and it was working. They had the right vision, people, execution, and they had chosen to move away from the HP legacy of a decentralized organizational structure in pursuit of a more contemporary shared services model. They were swiftly undertaking a massive change management and integration exercise. 2 years after their start, some of their key markets started to shift significantly. They found their revenue started declining rapidly. And despite their intent to be even more externally and competitively focused, they were now caught up in cost-cutting measures. They lost their external focus, or at least their ability to forecast and react to the changing economic conditions, and they were facing inevitable layoffs. Unfortunately, in a time of great uncertainty, their communication weakened rather than ramping up. Their leadership clamped down rather than delegating, and one of the best elements inherited from HP, that entrepreneurial spirit, started withering away in the employees who were now Agilent. And frankly, there was just simply too much chaos among this new firm. What we can learn from this case is that a change plan is only a plan. External forces need to be monitored and plans adapted. Communication is king, especially in times of crisis. And perhaps most important, change management needs to play a central function, working as an integrator, a facilitator, and a scout. And it's my belief that had Agilent maintained the autonomy of decentralized business units with a centralized integration team leading the change plan, they might have yielded better results. Hey, perhaps the Model Team methodology may have worked for them if they had focused on one part of the business at a time in order to form a shared services relationship. I do know that one of the secret ingredients in the recipe for successful model teams is the entrepreneurial spirit of the frontline teams with the autonomy to run their business through the support of a centralized KPO. It is this push and pull balance that makes change work in an ever-changing world. Here's another textbook case for change. Many years ago, I led the integration of a healthcare service business. There were multiple distinct units, and we wanted to bring them all together to be one unit. It was about a $2 billion firm with over 2,000 employees, so this was quite an undertaking. And I'm pretty sure at the time we were saying things like, we need to leverage our synergies and yeah, let's make sure we're one face to the customer. And while we were saying those things, I knew they were never going to be our call to action, nor our guiding coalition to get this massive field service and sales force on board with a massive change initiative like this. The company was full of trained Six Sigma and change acceleration process champions, and I was one of them, utilizing the tool sets on a routine basis. And one really smart guy on our team suggested that we utilize the Hoshin-Conry methods to organize our strategic goals and deployment. And that worked really well in herding our senior leadership team into articulating the main value that we wanted to deliver. And then there was another super smart guy on the team that encouraged me to read a book. It's called Five Frogs on a Log. My mission and approach to the change became crystal clear once I read that. And there are a few standout points in that book that triggered the shift in my thinking. And they include knowing best practices are based on past conditions. There's no such thing as a merger of equals. Culture cannot be blended like a milkshake. The new conditions wrought by a merger often cry out for a fresh point of view. And successful communication of change begins by understanding that the questions following any announcement will revolve around one central theme, and that is, how does this affect me? I know firsthand that sales and service people can take out their frustration to customers, especially when they're unclear about a massive change and what it's going to do. There is a direct correlation between employee morale and customer satisfaction. The last thing I wanted to do was to ignore the folks in the field. I mean, those are my people, my family. The field is where I came from and where I grew up. And I knew they knew what was happening with customers. And I also knew that they didn't know what the integration would mean for them. And I had to bridge that gap and reduce the anxiety and the uncertainty for everyone. Figuring out which communications were needed with who, what, when, where, and why was a daily job. Content was really important. Everyone wanted to see the new organizational charts. They wanted to know where cost cutting would be taking place. And they wanted to know about technology systems changing, merging before they happened. We focused on the behavioral changes that we needed, and we stayed on point with the value drivers and the progress therein from our Hosh and Conry methods. We listened and we responded non-stop. I utilized that book, Five Frogs on a Log, as a guide with strategic goal deployment tools to rally the team, focus our execution, and deliver a highly successful integration. And we did it in 6 months. Every change that we initiate is going to be transformational, although I hope all leaders will aim for at least one after finishing this YouTube series. We have to make incremental changes regularly too. As an example, let's say that you need to make a change to your staffing model. Maybe it's the weekends that your team struggles with. And yeah, I know, not only is it hard to get folks to work the weekends, but those shifts typically will suffer from high absenteeism and overtime. And they're typically assigned to the newer associates, right? Because tenured ones want to have better schedules. There may have been requests directly from your front line to provide alternative work schedules, such as 4 10-hour or 3 12-hour shifts. And you've got a workforce management team that is guided by customer demand, which is probably measured by the minute. I hope it is. So it'll allow for some good data coupled with human resource to analyze this problem, and you need to do that. And a side benefit is that when you do the analysis, you'll find that some of the teams might be rotating to work the weekends, but maybe other ones are not. Because you want a spirit of equality and you need to take care of customers and respect the employee tenure, you devise a solution utilizing the data with a cross-functional team. And this solution could require every associate to become part of the weekend schedule rotation. However, dedicated 3, 12, and 4 10-hour shifts from late Friday through early Monday morning time could be offered first. And maybe to your surprise, there'll be a lot of takers for those shifts because employees want a condensed schedule and more days off. And then once that dedicated weekend shift selection process is complete, you can move on to fill the remaining 20% of weekend associates' schedules. And maybe surprisingly, you'll find that the remaining employees only need to work a weekend shift once every blue moon. Okay, maybe once every 2 months. But for some who had not worked weekends in a very long time, the thought or even a whisper of a change coming is not going to be pleasant. There may be a heavy sense of entitlement in the group. However, what about the other folks? You know, for them, there's relief and hope. And although this change might be minor, in the overall larger scheme of your business, you're going to manage it with urgency, a guiding coalition, clear purpose, comprehensive communications, and anchors to your team's culture. And you're going to concentrate communications on the "how does this affect me" question we all know all employees would ask. The change is going to be a win-win because weekend scheduling is going to further stabilize your operations for your customers and is going to give new flexibility to your employees. When thinking about change management across a varied population such as the one I just mentioned, whether it's major or minor, I frequently refer back to the diffusion of innovations theory. It's really just the adoption curve as shown here. And I find that this explains it in a way that is easiest to convey. You see, in any group, there are generally 16% or so who will innovate and adapt early on. These are the type of folks who always want to be on the cutting edge. They pre-order the next great gizmo and participate in beta software programs to tinker with them just because it's cool and they want to be first. These are the folks on the far left-hand side of the curve. The vast majority, though, of people, this is the 68%, will be divided into early and late majority. And these are those two big chunks in the middle of the curve. They are the general population who kind of flock like sheep, some going more quickly than others, but they're going with the flow. And then there's the 16% who will lag behind. Those are on the far right-hand side of the curve. And this is the group that has to see the evidence, be certain that it's safe, and have strong opinions on why they should or shouldn't do something. And in the case of the change to the weekend shift work, it's going to be vital to understand the different groups. You have to ensure that their views are understood and addressed with proper communication in the change plan to focus on the 84%. But we can't ignore the 16% of laggards. In fact, they can provide some of the richest intel on why the change might be flawed. We have to respect this perspective and listen so that we can gain the valuable insights for the risk mitigation plan. And by contrast, they can become your biggest headache if you let them. Stay focused and help the team adapt. Undeniably, when making any significant change, one of the biggest things leaders get wrong is not planning for a potential drop in performance during the change process. There are some who might say that an inevitable dip is a myth. They believe it might be more of a mind over matter issue because if you plan better, state your intentions, and execute flawlessly, you'll avoid the dip. They point out there's many firsts that have been achieved when people let go of perceived barriers. They say you can run a 4-minute mile. Now, I would like to believe that I follow that vision in optimistic perpetuity. But practically speaking, and based on multitudes of published research and experience, a dip is going to happen as the organization unlearns and relearns the new mode. Agilent was a huge example of this going wrong. I say, plan for it. Your job is to minimize the depth and the duration of the change curve and to sustain the gains. You can do this with good planning, communication, and training before, during, and after the change is made. No matter how transformational the change is, a simple outline of what we're planning to do can provide grounding. Communication during any change is crucial, but before we can do it, we need to articulate in our own mind and on paper what exactly we are going to do and what are we going to say. And once that's clear, go forth and prosper.